Hello and welcome to this week's Economics Live from the School of Philosophy and Economic Science in London. My name is Ian Mason and I'm a tutor and student of both practical philosophy and economics with justice in the school. We call it Economics with Justice to emphasize the importance of just and fair outcomes from the understanding and application of economic principles. What it comes down to is that bad economics will produce unjust outcomes, and good economics will have just outcomes for everyone affected by economics, which is pretty much everyone. For example, there's a lot of discussion nowadays about taxation and increasing government revenue to cover the costs of keeping economies afloat during the pandemic lockdowns and their fallout, as well as huge disruptions to world trade from various causes. The problem is that every tax affects someone, and people affected by increasing taxes tend to complain and do all they can to avoid having to pay. A story illustrates the point. It said that there were two kings of neighboring lands. Both lands were about the same size, with economies based on production and sale of dates from date palms. Both lands were fertile and well able to produce dates. Both kings needed to raise revenues. The first king levied the tax on the date trees themselves and the incomes derived from them. The effect was that many producers chopped down trees and increased the prices of the dates to avoid or just to pay the tax. And the king and his citizens ended up poorer than before. The second king taxed the land where the date palms grew. The effect was to encourage producers to plant more trees and grow more dates in order to pay the tax. Both king and citizens ended up better off. Well, the story is only a story, but it illustrates an important point, that there are good and bad ways of taxing, and they have very different effects. The first king levied his taxes on the production of the dates, thereby creating a burden on the actual productive process. One well-known effect of taxation is that it discourages the use of whatever is taxed, whether it's the product itself, the process of production, or the employment of people in the productive process. Taxes discourage. The second king levied his tax on the most fundamental and unavoidable fixed asset, the land where the date palms grew. This left every incentive to be as productive as possible, not only to pay the tax, but also to enjoy the revenues that high production allowed. Simple as the story is, the principle can be applied to even the most complex economy or economic process. This is because every economy and economic process has to be founded on what is naturally available before any human intervention. The revenue raised from auctioning the electromagnetic spectrum in the UK provides an example. The government raised substantial revenues by selling licenses to use what was already there. The telecoms companies paid the price because of the revenues that they reasonably anticipated from use of the spectrum, leaving them with every incentive to make the best use possible. The same principle has been applied to North Sea oil licenses. Setting aside for the moment the question of whether further exploitation of fossil fuels is a good or a bad thing, that's another discussion. But it is an example of taxation as encouragement rather than discouragement to economic activity. There's a further refinement here that's important. Economic resources are rarely distributed equally or equitably across any territory. Some will inevitably be easier to access and use than others. If taxation is levied equally across all of them, there can easily be a significant and anti-competitive burden placed on resources that are more difficult to access. Say it takes 10 people to obtain 1 unit of a particular resource in one place and 20 people in another. Then any tax, for example, on the incomes of those people, will bear unfairly on the more difficult place, since the market price will be the same for both. Well, no tax system can iron out the differences between places, but it can, and arguably should, level the playing field by levying the tax where it can be most easily paid. So, the details and ramification of tax policy can, for some reason, have a numbing effect on the human mind. That is, until it's realized that the justice, equity, and potential of whole economies turns on it. How economies and people are taxed has a direct bearing on how they may live and work, and on the fairness of the distribution of life's opportunities. In a world facing huge challenges from inflation, inequality, and economic instability, it would be easy to think that there are more important things to worry about than tax policy. But that would also be a mistake. Taxation is the most flexible weapon in the economist's armory. It makes a big difference if it's used with the brutality of a bludgeon or with the skill and finesse of a rapier. So, thank you for taking a moment to think about these things. Thank you for listening. To find out more about the school, its courses, and its events, go to www.schoolofphilosophy.org. So, farewell for now.